At 6:14 that morning, I opened my front door and found 3 bright orange HOA violation notices zip-tied directly onto my solar panels. Not taped to the door, not mailed to my house, zip-tied to the panels. The total fines were $5,000, and according to the letter, I had 14 days before things got worse. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, because 3 months earlier, I had done everything the right way. I submitted the application, I waited for the architectural review committee, I paid the permit fees, I hired a licensed installer, and I even changed the color of the panel frames because the HOA said silver edges would disrupt the visual harmony of the community. So when I saw those orange tags on my roof, I didn't feel confused. I felt stupid, because I had followed every rule they gave me. And somehow, they were still telling me I was in violation. The first tag said,
"Unauthorized exterior modification."
The second one said,
"Feasible energy equipment from public street."
The third one was the one that made my hands go cold.
"Daily fine begins in 14 days.
$100 a day. Every day. Until the panels were removed, relocated, or approved under what they called proper architectural standards. I stood in my driveway reading the same sentence over and over while my neighbor across the street pretended not to stare. The panels had been on my roof for 8 days. 8 days! They had passed city inspection, they were connected to the grid, they were producing power. And the first bill I got after installing them was almost half of what I normally paid. For the first time in years, my house felt like it was finally working for me. Then the HOA decided it had a problem. Not with the wiring, not with the permits, not with safety. With visibility. The letter said the panels could be seen from the main road entering the subdivision. Apparently, that was enough to classify them as a visual nuisance. A visual nuisance. That phrase stayed in my head all morning. Because 2 houses down, someone had a 12-foot inflatable football player in their yard for 6 months. Across the cul-de-sac, a board member had a rusted boat trailer parked behind a half-dead hedge. And the HOA president himself had a satellite dish bolted to the side of his house like a metal wart. But my solar panels were the visual nuisance. I called the management office first. Nobody answered. I emailed the architectural committee. No response. Then, at 9:37 a.m., I got a reply from the HOA president himself. No greeting, no explanation, just one sentence.
"The board warned you this would happen if you ignored the community standards."
That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had been waiting for me. Around 11 that morning, somebody knocked on my front door. Not rang. Knocked. 3 hard hits. The kind that already tells you the person on the other side isn't visiting. I opened the door and immediately saw the HOA president standing on my porch. Behind him was a woman from the architectural review committee holding a clipboard. And behind them, parked on the street, sat a white SUV with the HOA management logo on the side. 3 people for solar panels. Nobody smiled. The HOA president looked past me before saying a word, straight at the roof. Then he said, "We warned you." That was it. No hello, no explanation, just, "We warned you." I remember staring at him, trying to understand what he meant, because 3 months earlier I'd gone through every single step they required. Applications, drawings, property survey, roof measurements, panel specifications, everything. I even attended one of their committee meetings because they wanted clarification about visibility concerns. Visibility concerns. That phrase again. So I asked him, "What exactly is the problem?" He looked at the roof, pointed, and said, "The front-facing slope." I honestly thought he was joking, because out of every possible issue, electrical permits, city approval, safety inspections, structural modifications, their only problem was which direction the panels were facing. Then the woman with the clipboard opened a folder and pulled out a highlighted page. Section 4.2, Community Exterior Preservation Standards. She started reading.
that no technological structures or energy collection devices shall remain visible from primary public roadway access if the installation materially alters neighborhood visual continuity.
Silence. I looked at her, then I looked at him, then back at her, because I genuinely thought I misunderstood. Energy collection devices? Who writes like that? I said, "You mean solar panels?" She nodded and told me the rear-facing roof slope would have been preferred. Preferred. That word annoyed me instantly, because preferred suddenly became required. I asked if they wanted me to move the entire system to the backside of my roof, and the HOA president crossed his arms and said, "If you want compliance, yes." Like he was explaining gravity. Like moving an entire solar installation was the same as changing flower pots. Then came the part that made absolutely no sense, because my rear roof wasn't even facing the sun properly. Anybody standing in my backyard could see that. Behind my property line stood a giant oak tree. Massive. Older than the subdivision itself. Half my backyard sat in shadow every afternoon because of that tree. I asked them if they seriously wanted me to move panels behind a 40-foot oak tree. No answer. Then, finally, the committee woman said that the board believes aesthetics require compromise. Compromise. Interesting word. Because compromise usually means both sides lose something, but somehow their compromise involved me spending thousands of dollars. I remember looking at all three of them, standing there, in perfect silence. Clipboard, crossed arms, matching HOA polo shirts. And suddenly I had this strange feeling. This wasn't about panels. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't even about aesthetics. Because I started remembering conversations from months earlier. At the committee meeting, one of the board members had asked if more residents plan to install these. Not how they work or how much energy they produce, just do more residents plan to install these? At the time, I ignored it. But standing on my porch, looking at them, I started wondering something. What if they weren't trying to stop my panels? What if they were trying to stop everyone after me? Then the HOA president suddenly handed me a folded paper. Estimated compliance instructions. I looked down and immediately saw the first line. Required relocation of all front-facing panels. Estimated homeowner responsibility, $4,800 to $6,300. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain rejected it. Almost $6,000 to move something already installed, already inspected, already approved? Then I saw something else. At the bottom. Tiny letters. Smaller than everything else. A note. If relocation substantially affects system performance, homeowner assumes all energy efficiency consequences. I read that sentence twice. Then 3 times. Then I looked back up, because suddenly something felt wrong. Very wrong. Because if they already knew moving the panels could affect performance, how much performance were we talking about? 5%? 10? I had no idea, but I knew somebody who would. So after they left, I called my installer, and what he told me the next morning completely changed the story. The installer showed up the next morning at 8:12. Pickup truck, coffee in one hand, tablet in the other. I handed him the compliance letter before he even got out of the driveway. He read the first page, then the second, then looked up at the roof, then looked at me, then back at the roof. And the first thing he said was, "Wait. Just wait." Not angry, not confused, just that weird tone people use when they're trying to figure out if something is stupid or illegal. Then he asked, "They want you to move these where?" I pointed behind the house, toward the backyard, toward the giant oak tree. He stared for maybe 3 seconds, then slowly turned toward me. No.
That was it. No explanation, just no. Then he walked toward his truck, opened the passenger door, and pulled out a black hard case. Inside was a tablet and a foldable solar mapping rig. Until that moment, I honestly thought he was overreacting, because in my head I kept thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe losing a little sunlight isn't a big deal.
Maybe we're arguing over 5%, 10 at worst. Then he climbed onto the side yard gate and looked over the fence. Silence. A long silence. Then he shook his head. Not good. Not even close. I followed him into the backyard, and suddenly I saw what he saw. The oak tree. Not from my kitchen window, not from the patio, but from roof height. It was completely different, because from that angle, the branches stretched directly across the path of afternoon sunlight. Huge sections, massive shadows. And suddenly I realized something. I had never looked at my house the way a solar installer does. I lived there. He measured it. Big difference. He opened the software on the tablet. Satellite imagery, roof angle calculations, tree height estimates, seasonal shadow movement, everything. Then a 3D model of my house appeared, and for the first time, I saw my property reduced into numbers. Roof pitch, 32 degrees. Current orientation, south-southeast. Rear slope, northwest. Primary obstruction, oak tree. Estimated afternoon loss. Calculating. The screen paused, then a number appeared. 23%. I remember blinking, then blinking again. 23. Not 5, not 8, not 10. 23%. I actually thought there had to be some mistake. I asked him, that can't be right. He zoomed in, rotated the model, and moved the sunlight simulation forward. Winter, spring, summer, fall, every season. Same problem. Branches, shadows, loss. Again, and again. Then he zoomed out and opened another screen. Annual production estimates. Blue bars, green bars, summer peaks, winter drops. Then he overlaid a second model. Current roof versus HOA relocation plan. Side by side. The difference looked ridiculous. One graph climbed smoothly. The other looked like somebody dropped stairs down a hill. I asked, that's all from one tree? He nodded, then zoomed into late afternoon production. The shadows started around the outer edge first, then slowly crawled inward, panel by panel, like watching somebody slowly turn lights off inside a building. I stood there staring at the animation longer than I probably should have, because once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Then he tapped one corner of the screen. Energy loss estimate. Annual savings reduction, $1,340. Pause. I looked at him, then looked again. Because now the HOA wasn't asking me to move panels. They were asking me to lose money. Every year. For years. And suddenly I remembered something weird. At one of the committee meetings months earlier, a resident asked whether future solar installations could affect neighborhood standards. The board president laughed. Actually laughed. Then said, we don't want roofs turning into power plants. Everybody laughed. I laughed too because I thought it was a joke. Standing there now, I wasn't laughing anymore. Because suddenly I started wondering how many people had simply listened. How many homeowners got told to move them, hide them, or change them, and just obeyed? Because most people don't call installers back. Most people don't question numbers. Most people see official paperwork and assume somebody smarter already checked everything. And honestly, 24 hours earlier, so did I. Then he looked at me and said, if you move these panels back there, you'll destroy the economics. Destroy. Interesting word, because HOA people talked about aesthetics, visual continuity, community standards. He talked about economics, numbers, reality. I asked, how bad? He sat down on the tailgate and started doing calculations.
expected annual production, utility rates, installation payoff period, energy offset. And finally, he said, if everything stays where it is, your system pays itself off in around 7 years. Then he pointed toward the backyard. If they force relocation, closer to 11. 11 years! I just stared at him. Because suddenly, this wasn't about appearance anymore. This wasn't just move panels. This was lose years. Lose money. Lose efficiency. Lose the entire reason I installed solar in the first place. Then he said something else. Something that completely changed the mood. Because his face changed. Like he suddenly remembered something. He asked, "What state are you in again?" I told him. Silence. Then, Not exactly the response I wanted. So I asked, "What does that mean?" He stared at the roof, then looked back at me. Then said, "Maybe your HOA has a bigger problem." I remember standing there waiting. Nothing. No explanation. Then he walked back to his truck and opened another folder. Different paperwork, different documents. He flipped through the pages, stopped, looked at me, looked back down, then smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a normal smile. One of those smiles people make right before telling you something dangerous. Then he asked, "Have you ever heard of solar rights laws?" Silence. Because I hadn't. Not once, not ever. Then he laughed. A small laugh. And said, "Most people haven't." And suddenly, for the first time in 24 hours, I stopped feeling like the idiot in the story. Because maybe, just maybe, the HOA had made a very expensive mistake.
That night, I didn't sleep. I tried. I turned off the kitchen light. I went upstairs. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the same number over and over. 23%. Not a small adjustment. Not an inconvenience. 23%. Enough to turn an investment into a decoration. At 1:12 a.m., I got back up and walked downstairs. The house was dark, except for the light over the kitchen sink. I spread everything across the table. The HOA notices, the compliance instructions, the installer's production estimates, the screenshots. Front roof, 100%. Back roof, 77%. I opened my laptop. At first I wasn't even sure what I was searching for. Can HOA force solar panels relocation? HOA solar visibility rules. Can HOA reduce solar efficiency? Then I typed solar rights HOA law. And that single search changed everything. Because the results weren't blog posts. They weren't angry homeowners. They were state documents. Property code, civil code, energy law, actual legislation. I started opening pages. Most of it looked unreadable. Definitions, subsections, cross-references, legal language designed to make normal people close the browser. Then I saw a phrase. Restrictions that significantly increase cost or decrease efficiency. I stopped. Read it again. Then again. Increase cost, decrease efficiency. That was exactly what they were doing. Not directly, not openly. They weren't banning the panels. They were making compliance expensive enough and inefficient enough to make keeping them pointless. A ban without calling it a ban. Then I found it. Halfway down the page, buried between paragraphs nobody probably ever reads. A homeowners association may not impose restrictions that reduce the efficiency of a solar energy system beyond legally permitted thresholds or substantially increase installation costs. I stopped moving because suddenly the entire situation looked different. Until then, the HOA acted like their rules were absolute. But their rules weren't absolute. State law existed above HOA rules. And if the installer's analysis was accurate, 23% wasn't just a number. It was evidence.
For the first time since seeing those orange notices, I felt something shift. Not relief, not victory, possibility. Then I went back to the HOA relocation instructions. Required relocation of all front-facing panels. Estimated homeowner responsibility? $4,800 to $6,300. Potential system impact? Reduced energy production. I stared at that line. Reduced energy production. Their own document admitted it. Not directly, not intentionally, but enough. Enough to matter. That was the moment something really bothered me. Not the fine, not the money, the confidence. The confidence that I would panic and obey. And honestly, 24 hours earlier, I probably would have. If the installer hadn't come over, if he hadn't run those simulations, if I hadn't seen 23% appear on that screen, I might have moved everything or taken the system down completely. At 2:26 a.m., I emailed the installer. Subject, need written solar assessment. I asked for everything. Performance estimates, roof comparison, shadow analysis, cost impact, and one final question. Does this violate state solar rights law? I expected an answer in the morning. He replied 6 minutes later. 6 minutes! His response said, I can't provide legal advice, but this is exactly why these laws exist. I read that sentence 3 times, because suddenly, something clicked. The law wasn't magic. It wasn't going to solve everything, but it changed the balance. Before that night, I was one homeowner arguing with a board. After that night, I was one homeowner holding evidence. Big difference. At 7:48 a.m., the installer sent the report. 12 pages. Charts, production estimates, shadow simulations. Then, page 6. Projected annual production reduction if relocated, 23.4%. I stared at the decimal. 23.4. Somehow the decimal made it feel worse, less emotional, more real. I attached the report to an email. Then the state law section, then their relocation demand. I hovered over the send button for almost a minute. Part of me still thought, call first, be reasonable, calm down. Then I looked at the orange notices still sitting on my kitchen table, zip-tied to my panels. At 8:03 a.m., I clicked send. 4 hours later, I got a reply. Not from management, not from the committee, from the HOA president himself. 2 lines. The board does not recognize your interpretation of state law. Your violation remains active. I read it once, then smiled, because he had just done exactly what I needed. He put it in writing. 12 pages. Charts, production estimates, shadow simulations. Then, page 6. Projected annual production reduction if relocated, 23.4%. I stared at the decimal. 23.4. Somehow the decimal made it feel worse, less emotional, more real. I attached the report to an email. Then the state law section, then their relocation demand. I hovered over the send button for almost a minute. Part of me still thought, call first, be reasonable, calm down. Then I looked at the orange notices still sitting on my kitchen table, zip-tied to my panels. At 8:03 a.m., I clicked send. 4 hours later, I got a reply. Not from management, not from the committee, from the HOA president himself. 2 lines. The board does not recognize your interpretation of state law. Your violation remains active. I read it once, then smiled, because he had just done exactly what I needed. He put it in writing. 3 days later, the Architectural Review Committee finally responded. Not the HOA president, not management, the committee. Subject line, Solar Installation Review Update. I opened it expecting one of 2 things, approval or rejection. Instead, I got something worse,
conditional approval. At first, I actually smiled, because conditional approval sounded reasonable. Reasonable sounded normal. Reasonable sounded like progress. Then I opened the attachment. 7 pages. 7 pages for solar panels! The first page looked harmless. General architectural considerations, visual harmony, community standards, exterior integration. Fine, whatever. Then page 2 started getting strange. Panel frames must be matte black. No silver trim, no reflective surfaces, no visible mounting hardware. I kept scrolling. All conduit lines must remain hidden from street visibility. External conduit exposure prohibited. Any visible components must match exact exterior paint codes. Exact paint codes, not similar. Exact. Then, mounting systems shall remain flush with roof profile. No elevated configurations permitted. No optimization tilt structures permitted.
I stopped, read that one twice, then 3 times, because optimization tilt structures wasn't something homeowners say. That was installer language. Somebody had looked this up. Somebody had done research. Then came my favorite part. The committee reserved the right to conduct visual inspections from street level after installation modifications. Visual inspections. I actually pictured grown adults slowly driving past my house judging roof angles. And honestly, that image wasn't even difficult to imagine anymore. Because by then, I had already learned something. HOAs never say no if they can say maybe. And maybe is dangerous, because maybe creates work, maybe creates cost, maybe creates delays, maybe wears people down. I kept reading. Then page 4, landscape integration recommendations. Recommendations. Interesting choice of word, because under recommendations it listed decorative shrubs, privacy screening vegetation, approved architectural barriers? Barriers? For roof panels. I stared at the page, then laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because for a second, I honestly wondered if they wanted me to plant trees to hide solar panels from people driving by at 30 miles an hour. Then I noticed something. Every restriction by itself looked small. Black frames, flush mounting, paint matching, concealed conduit, street inspections. Individually, nothing insane. Together, different story. Because I opened the installer estimate beside the HOA requirements, and suddenly numbers started changing. Black frame upgrades, additional cost. Conduit relocation, additional cost. Roof mounting changes, additional cost. Labor revisions, additional cost. Again, and again. Then I remembered a sentence from state law. Restrictions that substantially increase cost. Substantially. Interesting word. Because HOA language loved words like reasonable, appropriate, preferred, or community standards. But state law used numbers. Numbers don't negotiate. Then I reopened the committee document. This time slower, line by line. Because once somebody tells you where the trick is, you start seeing it everywhere. Page 5. Any future maintenance or replacement of system components shall require additional architectural review. I stopped. Read it again. Future maintenance. Not installation. Maintenance. So if an inverter failed years later, review. If wiring changed, review. If panels needed replacement, review. Then another line. The committee reserves the right to request additional visual modifications if future community standards evolve. Evolve? That word almost made me laugh. Because evolve according to who? 5 people in polo shirts sitting around folding tables once a month? Then another one. Future compliance determinations remain subject to board discretion. Discretion, another HOA favorite. Because discretion means rules can suddenly become feelings, and feelings can change. I remember sitting there, realizing something uncomfortable. This wasn't paperwork. It was a maze. Not designed to stop me immediately,
designed to slowly make ownership exhausting. Because even if I won now, they wanted me thinking, what happens next year? What happens after that? How many approvals? How many meetings? How many letters? And suddenly I understood why people quit. Not because they lose, because eventually they decide peace is cheaper. Then I called the installer. Not because I wanted opinions, because I wanted math. I forwarded the entire document. 30 minutes later, he called. Silence. A long silence. Then, "You've got to be kidding." That was his greeting.
Then, they found every workaround. I asked what that meant. He sighed, a long sigh, then explained, they know they can't directly ban the system, so they're stacking restrictions. Stacking. That word stayed in my head, because that's exactly what it felt like. Not one wall, 10 smaller walls. Then he started listing everything. Flush mounting, reduced optimization. Paint matching meant custom labor. Conduit relocation meant opening walls. Black frame replacement meant different inventory. Inspection requirements meant scheduling delays. Then he gave me a number. Estimated additional compliance cost, $3,400. I stared at the phone. Because now we had a $5,000 plus relocation, plus $3,400 compliance modifications, plus a 23% efficiency loss. This wasn't approval. This was paperwork cosplay. Then he said, wait. Typing, silence, more typing. Then, I've seen this before. Immediately I sat up, because that sentence mattered. I asked where. Arizona, Texas, California. Different states, same pattern, same game. Different HOA. He told me homeowners usually give up around this point. Not because they lose, because they get tired. Tired of forms, tired of meetings, tired of revisions, tired of fighting people with unlimited free time. Unlimited free time? That one hurt, because it felt true. Then he said something else, something I hadn't considered. Get an attorney. Silence. Because until then, lawyers still felt dramatic, expensive, nuclear. But he didn't sound dramatic. He sounded tired, like he'd seen this movie before. Then he said, not because you'll sue, but because they'll recognize the letterhead. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't a solar fight. This wasn't architecture. This wasn't aesthetics. This was pressure. Pure pressure. And pressure only works until somebody pushes back. That night, I looked at the HOA requirements one last time. 7 pages. 7 pages designed to say yes, while meaning no. And sitting there, I realized something. The war didn't start when they zip-tied notices onto my panels. The war started when they realized I knew how to read their rules. The next morning, I called an attorney. The attorney's office was smaller than I expected. No giant glass building, no dramatic conference room, no shelves full of law books. Just a quiet office between a dentist and an insurance agency. Honestly, that made me trust him more, because people who actually know things rarely decorate it. I handed him everything. The notices, the solar assessment, the committee packet, the emails, the installer estimates. 7 pages of architectural insanity. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, didn't even make a face. He just kept reading, page after page. Highlights, restrictions, cost estimates. Silence. A long silence. Then he reached page 6. Stopped, went back, read something again, then looked up.
First question. Did they really send this? I nodded. Silence. Then, that was becoming a pattern. Installer, attorney,
Not exactly confidence-inspiring. Then he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, looked at me, then asked, "Do you know what the funniest part is?" I said no, because honestly, I assumed none of this was funny. Then he tapped the paper, right there, middle of page 6, and said, "They know they can't ban solar, so now they're trying to make solar annoying." I stared at him, because somehow that single sentence explained everything. Not illegal, not impossible, exhausting. Then he picked up a pen and wrote 2 words, reasonable restrictions. Underlined them twice, then slid the paper toward me. I looked down. Nothing happened, because I had seen the phrase online, but I still didn't understand. He pointed toward the HOA packet, then toward the state code, and said, "These people are confusing restrictions with punishment." Silence. Then he explained, restrictions can exist. Black frames? Sure. Concealed conduit? Fine. Visual consistency? Okay. But restrictions have limits. Because once restrictions start destroying efficiency or dramatically increasing cost, they stop being restrictions. They become barriers. And barriers are a problem. Then he grabbed a calculator and started typing. Estimated relocation, additional modifications, projected losses, installer revisions, delay costs. Then he turned the screen. Total impact? Over $8,000. I stared, then stared again. Because until then, everything felt separate. Now, it sat there as one number. One very ugly number. Then he said, "Now, imagine explaining this to a judge. Or worse, imagine explaining it to homeowners paying HOA dues." And suddenly, for the first time, I thought about the board. Not as authority, but as risk. Because lawsuits don't magically create money. HOAs use community money, neighborhood money, everybody's money. And if this turned into legal exposure, things could get uncomfortable very, very fast. Then he asked one last question. "Do you want revenge?" I laughed, because honestly, 3 days earlier maybe. Now? No. I wanted peace. I wanted my roof back. I wanted strangers to stop measuring my house from the street. He nodded, then opened a blank document. No dramatic speech, no legal movie scene, just one sentence. "To whom it may concern." And for some reason, that scared me more than everything else. The strange part started after they backed down, not immediately. At first, nothing happened. The orange notices disappeared, the daily fines disappeared, the emails stopped. Everything went quiet. Too quiet. Because when something weird happens in a neighborhood, people talk, especially online. A few days after the violation disappeared, somebody posted inside the neighborhood Facebook group, "Wait, did the HOA actually reverse the solar panel violation?" Simple question. That was all. Then the comments started. One reply, "They told us front-facing panels would never be approved." Another, "We looked into solar last year and got discouraged before we even submitted anything." Then, "They said ours would hurt neighborhood aesthetics." Then, "They told us the board wasn't likely to support visible installations." I sat there reading comment after comment. Different houses, different streets, different people, same feeling. Not direct rejection, not official denial. Pressure, soft pressure, the kind that doesn't leave fingerprints. Never say no, just make yes exhausting. And suddenly, I realized something.
this wasn't just my story anymore. Because once people started comparing experiences, patterns started appearing. The same phrases, the same warnings, the same weird language. Community harmony, visual continuity, architectural concerns, preferred placement, recommended modifications. Different words, same result. Discourage people early enough, and most of them stopped pushing. Then my neighbor walked over. The same guy who pretended not to stare while I stood outside holding those orange notices. No small talk, no weather, no how's it going. Just, did they really back down? I said yes.
He looked up at the roof. Long pause. Then, my wife wanted solar last year. I asked what happened. He shrugged. They told us front-facing panels would never happen. Never. Interesting word, because never sounds official. Never sounds permanent. Never sounds like law. But never isn't law. Never is fear. I looked at him and said, "Ask for everything in writing." He nodded, and for a second, neither of us said anything. Then he looked back at the roof and quietly said, "So they knew." I didn't answer. Because honestly, I wasn't completely sure what they knew. But I knew one thing. People don't suddenly create 7 pages of restrictions unless they've been thinking about something for a long time. Over the next few days, more messages appeared. Then texts, then emails. One person wanted the installer's information. Another asked for the legal section I found. Another wanted copies of the solar assessment. By the end of the week, I had sent the installer's contact information to 4 different homeowners. Not because I wanted a movement. Honestly, I wanted silence. I wanted my house back. I wanted my roof to go back to being a roof. But something had shifted. Because people stopped assuming. People started asking questions. And questions make boards uncomfortable. Especially when the questions happen publicly. The next monthly HOA meeting looked completely different. Normally, those meetings were empty. Board members, management representative, maybe one resident angry about parking. That was usually it. This time, people stood against walls. Every chair was taken. Some people held folders, some brought printed emails. One woman had highlighted state solar law. Another person carried screenshots from Facebook. I remember walking in and immediately feeling something strange. Energy. Not anger, not exactly. Curiosity. People wanted answers. Real answers. The HOA president looked up when I walked in, then immediately looked back down. That was new. Very new. Public comments opened, and the first person to stand wasn't me. It was my neighbor. He stood there holding a folder with both hands, then asked, "How many solar applications have been discouraged before formal review?" Silence. A long silence. The HOA president adjusted papers, then said, "We don't discourage applications." Somebody laughed. Not loudly, just enough. The woman from the architectural review committee looked down at her papers. Then another resident stood up. She asked, "Do written guidelines exist defining unreasonable restrictions under state law?" Silence again. Another question. How many homeowners were told visible solar systems were unlikely to receive approval? And then another. Then another. And suddenly, I realized something. The room wasn't angry. The room was comparing notes. And comparison is dangerous. Because one complaint is random. 2 complaints feel like coincidence. But 3 complaints start becoming evidence. That was the moment everything changed. Not when lawyers got involved, not when violations disappeared, not when the fine stopped. Here. Because for the first time, people stopped acting like isolated homeowners and started acting like neighbors. By the end of the meeting, 6 residents requested formal solar application packets. 6! Not 1, 6!
And for the first time since those orange notices appeared on my roof, the board looked nervous.
The following week, the management company sent out a community update. Subject, Solar Policy Review. Short email, very professional, very calm, very careful. Too careful. Because after everything that happened, I expected explanations. I expected resistance. Maybe another condition. Maybe another revision. Instead, I opened the attachment and immediately noticed something strange. Section 4.2, gone. I scrolled back up, then down, then back up again, because for a second I honestly thought I missed it. No street visibility language, no preferred roof placement, no architectural continuity wording. Gone. Completely gone. The exact same section they used to threaten me. The same section they used to pressure other homeowners. Gone. Quietly. No announcement. No apology. No, we made mistakes. No, we misunderstood state law. Nothing. Just edited, like it had always been the plan. Honestly, that felt very HOA. Because that's how these things usually end. Not with someone standing up and admitting they were wrong. Usually, it ends with a revised PDF. A new date at the bottom. A sentence disappearing. A paragraph quietly changing shape. Just enough to avoid admitting the old version ever existed. Then, my phone started buzzing. Again. Neighbor messages, photos, questions. One message? Application approved. Another? We got ours accepted. Another? They didn't ask us to move anything. Then, a picture. Roof. Panels. Front facing. I stared at it for a second and laughed. Because 3 months earlier, everyone acted like visible panels would destroy civilization. Now suddenly? No emergency, no crisis, no collapse in property values. Amazing. Over the next few weeks, more roofs changed. One, then another, then another. Not everywhere, not overnight, but enough. Enough that driving through the neighborhood started feeling different. Not because of the panels, but because of what they represented. People stopped assuming the board automatically had the final word. That changed things, more than solar. People started asking questions about approvals, about fines, about policies, about things nobody used to challenge. And once people start reading, they usually keep reading. My panels are still exactly where they were installed. Front roof, same angle, same location, producing exactly what the installer predicted. Every month when the electric bill arrives lower than expected, I think about those orange notices. I still kept one. Not because I'm sentimental, because it reminds me how close I came to obeying. How close I came to paying thousands of dollars just because somebody with a clipboard sounded confident. And honestly, that's probably the part that bothers me most. Not the threats, not the paperwork, not even the money. The confidence. Because confidence makes people stop checking. Confidence makes people assume. Confidence makes people sign things they never read. And I almost did. If the installer hadn't looked at that tree, if he hadn't run the numbers, if I hadn't gone searching through state code at 2 a.m, this story probably ends very differently. Panels moved, money lost, case closed. Instead, all it took was one question. Show me the rule. And after that, show me the law. Because sometimes expensive mistakes don't begin with bad decisions. Sometimes they begin with official-looking paper. Sometimes they hide behind words like preferred, guidelines, community standards, future review, or reasonable. And sometimes, all it takes is asking for everything in writing to make people suddenly become very careful. So if your HOA tells you to move it, hide it, change it, or pay, slow down. Read everything. Ask questions. Ask for rules. Ask for decisions in writing. Because if they're right, paperwork protects them. And if they're wrong, paperwork suddenly becomes very uncomfortable.
If you've ever dealt with HOA nonsense before, you probably already understand why this story matters. And if you want more stories about neighborhood power, hidden rules, and the tiny legal details people ignore until they become expensive, subscribe. Because this wasn't the last time someone thought nobody would read the fine print.